Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We will start the presentation. There's just a few people online, but that's okay because this is being recorded, and many people that have registered for the conference, like myself, are located in North America, where it's currently 2 a.m. where I'm sitting, but they have asked that we send them the recordings of each session. And which we're happy to do. And this is going to be a great session. We have two different presentations today. The first one is called "Are You Remotely Interested? Exploring Student Engagement in Online International Internship Programs." And that will feature Paul Bailey with Pagoda Projects, John Gonzales with Bespoke Brewing Solutions, and Noi Kotev, who I'm told is actually still at Swinburne in the last few days of her degree. Is that right, Noi? And
Almost final year.
Final year. Okay.
Final few days.
Right. Excellent. So I apologize. I've kind of mislabeled you on the slide. And then in our second presentation, it's called Hybrid Internship, a new open door for diversity, equity, and inclusivity in the 21st century world. And so that will feature Daniele Cosentino, who's actually joining us from Bangkok, Thailand today. So welcome to everyone, and we're looking forward to a great presentation. For those of you who are online, I just wanted to say that if you could use the Q&A feature to ask any questions, and I will hold off until the end of the presentation to ask your questions of the two, or of all the presenters. If there's something impertinent to the actual slide that the presenter is on, I'll probably butt into their presentation and just ask for a clarification. So I hope that works for everyone. Just having trouble accessing my slides, so hold on 2 seconds here. So as I say, welcome. So my name is Matt Burns. I'm the founder of the International Internship Network. I've seen many people that have registered for the conference, and there's quite a few people in this presentation, Paul and Daniel, who I've met before at conferences around internships in the past. And then today, as I mentioned, we have Paul Bailey from Pagoda Projects, who is based in China at the moment, and is part of his presentation. He has John Gonzales with Bespoke Brewing Solutions. And as I said, Noi is with Swinburne University. So we're looking forward to their presentation. And then the second presentation, we have Daniele Cosentino, who's with Asia Internship Programs. And so we're looking forward to hearing from Daniele as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over the presentation to Paul. And as I say, if the audience has any questions, let me know, and I will probably ask at the end of the two presentations. But if I need to butt in, that's fine as well. So over to you, Paul, and good luck with your presentation.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks for the nice introduction. So I'm representing Pagoda Projects today. So we're a third-party provider of internships, originally in person, but since COVID-19, also remote. I'm also joined today, as Matt said, with Noi, who is a final year student completing a Bachelor of Mechanical Engineering with honours at one of our partner universities, Swinburne University of Technology. And I specifically invited Noi today because she is no stranger to internships, having done 4 previously, 3 of those being in person. 3 of those being online, and 1 of those in person, and also working whilst completing her final year at university. So absolute glutton for punishment. Thank you for joining us, Noi. Then we have John, who's Bespoke Brewing Solutions. So John is also a host company. He also hosted Noi for her internship. online internship, that is. So Bespoke Brewing Solutions design brewing equipment. They offer a full suite of consulting, hands-on support. They've installed equipment in over 10 countries, so there's a good chance if you're into your craft beer and you have a nice brew pub in your area, then there's a pretty good chance that John has been involved and you can thank him personally today if you like. So John's hosted interns with us in person and online previously. So again, as an industry stakeholder, he's a really, really relevant person to join us today. So thank you, John, as well. Forget the next slide, please, Matt. So in terms of what I'm going to be covering today, we started delivering internships in 2007 in person. We started doing internships online since June 2020. So we've got quite a lot of data now from the past 2.5 years or so. I'm going to preface this by saying that I'm not a statistician, but we do have quite a lot of good data, of which I'm going to share a small selection of with you all today. First, in relation to student engagement by the number of applications that we're seeing for online programs as we go back to in-person as well. Then looking at the student perceptions of online internship programs over time. And of course, you know, with John and Noy here as key stakeholders themselves, then I'm going to be asking their opinions and trying to see if they can help me to humanize the data as we go through it as well. The next slide, please. So starting off with just applications, so raw applications for online programs. So just to clarify, these aren't expressions of interest, these are full applications. So the students who've taken the time to understand the program, go through and complete sort of rather involved forms with ourselves and the partner university. So you can see there's data from 5 partner universities with whom we started offering internships to their students at different times. So one partner, we hit the ground running, started offering them, and this is the Australasian seasons, by the way, so winter 2020 is in, coming up to winter now. And there's been a bit of a steady increase going up to the summer of last year, so 2021, around sort of going into Christmas time last year, New Year this year. And I think that's as remote internships became more and more standardized and people kind of accepted them more. There was definitely a lot of inertia when we started offering them back in June 2020 to the whole idea. And as we all know, you know, tertiary education institutions are quite big ships to steer. So it did take quite a while for some partners to come on board. But as time's gone on, students are sort of seemingly more and more engaged with online programming. But then you can also see that that has now started to drop off again as we get closer in Australasia to delivering in-person programs, which will be later this year. If we go to the next slide, we can see how that translates to the UK programs. Because in the UK, we're about to embark on our busiest season for Brits going abroad during their summer. So our first cohort is going to be arriving next month. So these are for programs in Europe and one Asia program we're offering in Vietnam. And again, you can see that there was a slight increase from 2020 to 2021. And as we're now offering in person in the next few months, there's been a huge spike in terms of students wanting to do in-person programs. And as you can see, the purely online internship experience has kind of dropped off a cliff. Although what you can see in that final new bar on the right-hand side is blended or hybrid programs, depending on your preferred terminology. And that's kind of stayed, well, if you include that in the online delivery of programs, then it's kind of stayed quite high. And that's pretty interesting for us because we didn't really know what type of engagement we'd get for the hybrid programs. We thought that we'd get a bit of an explosion in interest for in-person programs. But on that one, we weren't really sure. In terms of what might happen after this, I'm not too sure. It's a bit difficult to predict. But maybe it's a good time again to maybe ask Noy to reflect a little bit on this, you know, having done it in person and online programs. Do you think that that solely online engagement was predictable? And do you think that that's a trend that's likely to continue?
I think that as we're coming out of COVID period, right, people are wanting to go back out and be around people again. So I think that would be expected. I would say that not enough people realize the benefits of online internships as well, though. So I think the more, if you do one or if you know someone that has done one, you realize how good and beneficial an online internship can be. But of course, naturally, people are going to want to go back into person.
Yeah, and it is interesting to see as well, because just for context again, all these internships are fully funded with the exception of flights. So even just from a cost perspective, the fact that students will have to pay for flights means that the in-person or the hybrid programs aren't going to be totally for free. So there are like inclusivity considerations and sort of expense considerations there, but even with the cost of the flight, it seems just people are super keen to travel, maybe underestimating the value of online programming, as you say. But probably the most
Can I
interesting thing
just
for
make
me,
one more
yeah,
comment
please.
on that? I think that specifically what you said there about the costs, I think people don't realize that as well. You forget about that. But say you can't afford to travel. I couldn't afford to travel, and I got a chance to work in a company that works in China. I think that's massive, meaning you don't have to pay for your flights, find accommodation, find a way to fund your accommodation, right? Because most people, you have to work to pay your rent. So being able to work in another country, be it China, Germany, anywhere, while still staying at home is huge, especially for your resume, for your own experience. It's massive.
Yeah, definitely. And for this, the accommodation would be covered as well. So yeah, again, it is interesting why quite a few are still considering to only do a portion of that in person, a portion online, when you consider there'd be no cost difference for them because they're still paying for that flight, and that's the only real expense other than in country. And let's face it, Vietnam's cheaper than the UK as well. So, John, in terms of from your perspective, just to bring into the conversation a little bit, does the thought of going back to having a vast majority of interns, that you're supporting being in person, does it make much difference to you as an organization? Would you be happy to host students regardless of whether it's online or in person?
We're gonna, yeah, I'd be happy in either setting really. I think we're a little bit different in with Swinburne being in Melbourne and our sales rep and our presence, our biggest presence within Australia for our equipment. We have a number of customers there, and a sales rep who's really keeping busy. It really helped us a lot, and I think it paid benefits too for the interns to have someone local there in the same time zone to also work with them and still have a dotted line back to us here in China and still work with the team here and get random emails in Chinese and have to go to Google Translate to kind of figure out what's going on. But that's the beauty of working internationally, and I think Noe appreciated that during her time. Of course, I'm always going to like the in-person. I'm just a people person. I like to have people around me, that energy. But you still get that. You still get that a lot with the hybrid or blended approach, especially with our footprint.
Yeah, it's almost like an accidentally hybrid internship. So not by design, but the fact that you have a presence in Melbourne means that the lucky Melbourne-based students get to engage in a different way than the traditional sort of purely online experience. Yeah.
And we had a recent intern in the UK, and they had a great experience with just working on us. And I think the biggest challenge really was time zone and just making sure that we had that time set aside. Both of us that worked, whether it was bi-weekly or every week, and just connect and see how things are going.
Yeah, time zone is a pretty difficult one to mitigate. We'll move on again, Matt, because I've got a few more slides that I just wanted to pick into in terms of some data. So I wanted to look at some student reflections from participants having completed an online program from 2020 up until now. So we asked the students following an online internship what they feel the challenges are. John just mentioned the time zones, and that's a pretty big one. But the theme of today is engagement, and as you can see, that is the predominant challenge. It's a pretty difficult thing for the students to sort of deal with, consistently having to mitigate that by offering the students the opportunity. For example, on the Pagoda program, they check in every week. We offer gamification so that the students get rewarded if they do certain parts of the program, if they do them well. If they register having a problem, then we prioritize them for support. And you have these like continuous feedback loops, which helps. But there's only so much that you can really do with a remote program in terms of the way of support. Students can't come into the office. You can't have that interpersonal connection. what about from a host, John? In terms of staying engaged, that's a two-way street. Have you had challenges as an industry partner in terms of hosting students remotely?
I'd like to say we've been very lucky in the quality of interns that Pagoda Projects has forwarded our way for interviews. I was very specific in the proficiencies in the different applications they would be using to complete the tasks that we would be needing to accomplish. And in that regard, we were able to really kind of think about what we're going to assign them and try to give them more than they could probably handle and in one step so they're always just working towards a goal and have a task list of things to do. So they do stay motivated. They have things they're working on. And if scheduling doesn't permit or time doesn't permit where we can meet every day, at least they can be self-motivated to go finish that. And we've been very fortunate, especially with Noi. She's amazing at just knocking out those tasks and just being very self-sufficient when we're not available.
You're so fortunate, but I also think what you said at the beginning of that in terms of defining the tasks well and making sure that you have put a lot of work into defining those projects, it counts for a lot, especially with things like time zones, asynchronous work. It's important to have that definition. Maybe you can get away with that a little bit more with in person because students can shadow, they can just observe. That's one of the things that Noi mentioned in one of our calls that you maybe lose out on, right, from online work. Noi, you've done both. Were there any advice that you could give practitioners or educators in terms of what helped you to stay engaged on an online experience, or was there anything that you felt particularly challenging that wasn't being addressed by ourselves as a provider, for example?
Yeah, so knowing this question was coming up, I actually had a good think about it because it's such a hard one to answer. And I think what I've realized is the things that I appreciated the most about the online internships are things that mirror in-person internships. So in person, you might have a welcome day, or maybe before you leave, you might have a farewell day or party or something, right? So if you have something similar for the online ones, because you already are missing so much of that connection and face-to-face. So if you have something like that, that can make you feel like, oh, they really did appreciate my time with them, or something where you get to meet the team and all of them and have a chat with them, something that's not work related. It makes you feel a lot more engaged in the company and valued.
Yeah, so don't skimp on those interpersonal connections, and just because it's online, you shouldn't really take it less seriously. Just try to make the effort to connect people and get people involved, feeling like a colleague, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think because it is online, it's a bit more important.
For sure. Thank you for that. Just move to the next slide, Matt. I'm just conscious of running over time today, and there's so much I want to cover. Okay, so you can see here about how students perceived taking part in a remote internship would be. So from the first chart, you can sort of see that students have always generally had good expectations for online programs. They expected them to be useful to some extent, which I guess is pretty good. But you can also see trends in the second chart that early on, at least Pagoda's internship programs were receiving pretty high acclaim, suggesting that while students thought prior to doing an internship that they would be useful, maybe they didn't realize quite how much that they could get from an online internship. But you can also see that the upper end of the scale is decreasing quite a lot year on year over recent years, whereas the sort of apathy in terms of it being the same as expected is kind of increasing. So, from our side of things, we've definitely improved our programming year on year. We're adding components, we're responding to feedback. So if anything, our programs are getting better. So the only thing I can really assume is that perhaps students now have higher standards for online delivery, which arguably, they very much should, especially when you consider that costs, whether it's tuition, etc., are sort of comparable. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. I just hope that we can keep constantly adding components and upgrading online services to sort of make sure that we continue to meet growing expectations. Again, Noi, did you think that your remote internships, of the 3 that you've done, did they live up to expectations? I mean, it can't be that bad if you did 3 of them right.
They honestly surpassed my expectations. The very first one, I was slightly disappointed with because I didn't meet anybody really, but that was at the very, very beginning stages of COVID. And ever since then, I think with Bespoke, it was amazing, better than I expected, which made me want to do my next one. And that was even better than expected as well. So I think, yeah, you come into it thinking, oh, it's online, but it's amazing. It's very worth it.
Okay, and all the ones that you did were a little bit different, weren't they, as well? So different durations, sort of different fields.
Yeah, that's right. So the first one went for 1 week. The one with John and Bespoke Brewing went for 2 months. And my final one went for 9 months, actually. But it wasn't obviously every day. It was once a week. And I would get whatever tasks I needed to get done during that time. And we would catch up again. That's actually a really exciting one. It's being published in a paper. So that's very cool. But
Amazing.
We'll digress.
Do you have a preference for duration, having done those 3 very different durations online?
I think the 2 months is a good amount to get that full-time everyday work in there and get enough experience to then figure out what you want to do next. I think 1 week is way too short and 9 months is perhaps slightly too long. I think somewhere in the middle there is that Goldilocks zone.
You said to me again offline that a lot of it is finding out what you don't enjoy. So that's kind of like, it's almost, you have to hit more of those targets to find out what you do enjoy, you know, whether it's the nature of the work itself, the nature of colleagues.
Yes, that's correct. So obviously coming from a mechanical background, the first internship I tried was a mechanical job within a civil engineering department, and that made me realize very quickly I'm not interested in civil. And then when I did the Bespoke Brewing stuff, I wasn't necessarily going to do brewing. I always wanted to do automotive, but it made me realize just how much I love design. So then I realized I don't care what it is, as long as I'm doing design, I'm obviously gonna love it. And I got obviously very lucky with the last one that was in automotive.
Yeah, and it's going really, really well by the looks of it. So also, John, before we move on to the next slide, also interested just touching on your expectations as an industry partner, because one of our roles as a provider is to constantly source new internship opportunities for students online and in person. We have a lot of companies saying, nah, I'm not interested in remote. I don't know what students can do for me remotely. You decided to do it. How did it sort of align with your expectations?
I think it went really well for what we needed to be done. We try to give tasks which highlight, you know, in this case, you know, from the interview with Noi, just being a great candidate, understanding what background she had, it was a great fit because we need someone who could, you know, take tasks and do them, but also add their own design twist to it, which was really cool, and I think really enjoyed. So we try to give them as much freedom as we can to really feel part of it, that they're really contributing, that they're using their skill set and saying, okay, you know, actually he's asking my opinion, so let me knock this out of the park. Let me add my pizzazz to it, or my design skills, or my signature to it, if you will. And in every way, every intern we've had has just really taken that and ran with it and delivered some great results. Excuse me. And we're using to this day.
I think it's really important. Again, really good mentorship in terms of trying to elicit from the students, where can you contribute? I think that's something that maybe we don't emphasize enough. It's when you enter the working world, it's not being channeled in terms of this is what you do now, this is what you do now. It's saying, try to understand what it is the company's doing and try to assess with the skills and the theory that you've learned where it can be applied. So brilliant. And then the last slide for today, I think we'll skip the final slide, Matt, but for this slide, it's just, again, something that we did in response to student feedback. Students started to respond that the program was helping their mental health. So we started capturing that. And again, we've seen that, we've gone back to the, I'm not sure if this is the right slide. It's gone back to an earlier slide. There was a slide on mental health that we wanted to show you, which was just again how there we go. Yeah. So the strong positive impact at the beginning, I think maybe it's a lot to do with the novelty factor. You know, if you can remember back, we were all taking screenshots of our Zoom meetings and posting them on LinkedIn, and I think that has now well and truly lost its mojo. And I think the same is true for the mental health. I think the prolonged screen time and prolonged online engagement isn't healthy, and I think what we need to do is have a bit more of a balance, because we're seeing again that the continued online delivery isn't having an improving effect on people's mental health anymore, and we actually have to work carefully to avoid negative impacts. For example, semester time delivery of online internship programs. I had another slide to discuss a few things, but maybe we can leave that for the Q&A as well, because I'm conscious of running into Daniel's presentation. So say thank you for now, and then yeah, well, let's hear from Daniel at AIP. Thanks, guys.
Very good presentation, Paul. Congratulations. And so now I will proceed in taking over the screen with my presentation.
And Daniel, while you cue that up, I just wanted to say thank you to Paul and John and to Noy as well. That was a great presentation, and I really love hearing certainly from the employer and the students' perspective. So Noy and John, thank you for your contributions to that. It was really insightful. And Paul, thank you for sharing that data as well. I know that's not always an easy thing to do. We
have so much, Matt. That's the problem. It's kind of what do we show today here? You know, there's so much that we can draw out from it, again, if we have time.
Excellent. All right. Well, we can delve a little bit more into it when there's some questions at the end, but I'm just going to hand it over to Daniel to do his presentation now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Matt. And hello, everybody. Okay, my name is Daniele Cosentino, as Matt introduced. I'm the CEO of Asian Internship Program, an internship provider that specialized in finding internship for students, mostly in the Asian region, even if we recently expanded to other regions like Europe and Africa. Today, I'm here to present about a new model, specifically hybrid internship, with the title Hybrid Internship, a new open door for diversity, equity, and inclusivity in the 21st century, as we will see, as this model can help with this issue. That actually, by chance, Paul introduced with his own presentation. So I would like to start, sorry, my PowerPoint now is not working all of a sudden. Okay. I would like to start with a quote. Diversity is having a seat at the table. Inclusion is having a voice, and belonging is having that voice be heard. This quote from Liz Foslin and Molly West Duffy summarized the concept of DEI. Specifically, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusivity, and we cannot be belonging to it as it can be seen as redundant, but that's not important right now. Is very crucial, has become very crucial to improve efficiency in the workplace, and especially to grow as a society. But unfortunately, this concept has been impacted greatly during the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, the isolation that COVID-19 brought to all of us has impacted this issue. But at the same time, it has actually prompted a lot of talk, because since the isolation that the COVID-19 brought to all of us, actually, of course, as a humans, that's not what we are looking for. Actually prompted a lot of talk around this concept, and now actually they are the center of the discussion in our workplaces. Because of this, actually, we brought our own solution, even if, as we saw with the Pagoda project, actually, it seems like we're not the only one that came to these conclusions, of introducing new models that could be more inclusive for our students and our applicants in general, or for everyone that wants to attend internship. This solution came actually from the pandemic itself. Like in the meaning, like during 2020, of course, most of the students couldn't travel to their desired country. So we as a provider came out, and also the university or other third parties came out with these remote programs. But during 2021, with the reopening of the countries and the introduction of quarantine, actually it was again possible to do in-person internship, but with the problem of the quarantine. And as you can imagine, if you're doing an in-person internship and you have, let's say, 2 weeks or 3 weeks in the case of China or Hong Kong or Taiwan of quarantine, of course, this would hinder a lot your experience, as you might want to do a 2 or 3 months internship. And if you spend fundamentally a third of it, if not half of it, in quarantine, this would not be, let's say, optimal. So what we thought of doing was to actually take a different approach. So instead of doing either remote or in person, to actually try to combine the two by giving the chance to students to start their internship even before departing, arriving to the country, do the immigration check, getting in quarantine, and then continue with their internship for another 2 or 3 weeks, to then at the end of the quarantine go back to the in-person internship. What we realized is that this was actually helping also not only in solve this momentarily situation, but actually we created a new model that could have been applied to all our other students at large, and it could actually solve some of the problem and gain some of the, instead, the pros of remote and in-person model. In this specific, like as we all know, well, in-person internship are the standard, let's say. Oh, sorry, is the standard that we all know. They provide the real life experience that is very important. They allow to foster the communication skills, and they allow students to actually explore a new country, get in contact with a new culture, open their mind to a new world fundamentally, and make an experience of lifetime. For remote internship instead, we have the fact that they are very affordable, they are flexible, and they allow the fruition of them from anywhere. Like a person in any part of the world, even on different time zone and everything, can attend a remote internship, as we saw before with Noi, for example. But of course, they also present some cons, both models. While of course these models are the one that even that we use every day, and I think they will gonna stay with us for a long time. But they present some cons. For example, in the case of in-person, the cost of living that make it impossible or very, very hard for disadvantaged students or people with particular background. For example, backgrounds in which they are required to stay at home for a certain amount of times, and they cannot spend more than just a few weeks or a month, let's say, abroad. Or people that have instead the problem with in-person interaction, that instead needs to be eased inside an in-person interaction. Well, for remote instead, what we observe, especially with our customer and our partner companies, is that they are not considered as impactful for as the ones in person. And many students actually told us that if they could choose, they would of course prefer to do in person. Of course, this is understandable, as the in-person internship provides certain things that the remote simply cannot. Also, it lacks in-office experience. Now, as we saw in the presentation before, actually office experience can be in some way offset in other ways, like try to make a person feel in office even online. But of course, this is very hard. And for many companies, it's not completely doable, even because of other problems that can arise, like language barriers or the fact or certain workflows. And this also lacks of human interaction, and not offering inclusivity in the workplace can make feel people left out, just left to do their own project at home, but not feeling like they are part of something. And of course, it doesn't provide the experience in a different country. So the solution that we came out, it was combining, as we say, the remote with in-person by putting the two internship together. I want to put a little bit, make a little disclaimer here. When I talk about hybrid internship, we're not talking of what in our case we call work from home. So, or some other people call it already hybrid internship. The fact of doing, for example, half of the week working from home and the other half of the week doing it in person. No, for us, hybrid internship is literally two programs put one next to each other, to the other, in no particular order, but they are a full remote program and an in-person program, of course, in the same company, but they are two different sets. And this aims to solve some of the cons of the other models by providing a middle ground that also can encourage diversity, equity, and inclusivity in the workplace, especially from the internships, starting from the internship point of view. Here, I made graphically an example of the idea of the model. In general, it consists of two phases in no particular order, as we say, the remote and in-person internship. These phases, the aim is to create a more inclusive environment and give to the person the benefits and also to the company of both the type of internship, while trying to reduce instead of the drawbacks of either. This can improve the workflow during an internship, and also, for example, lower the sociocultural barrier in the case of going from remote to in-person internship, where a person that can maybe not afford a full 6 months or 4 months internship can instead go for maybe an internship of 2 months remotely and 1 month in person to experience the in-person part, while at the same time having a long internship without having the problem. Instead of between in-person to remote internship, it promotes adaptability to changing the situation, for example, and enhance the long-term relationship that the interns will create not only with their supervisor, but with their colleagues in their companies. Because since they will transition from in-person to remote, they will then have the chance to keep in contact with the person they work with, even after the internship ends, and they will be already used to this. Like, there are many benefits in this model, or at least that's what we are observing these days. As we say that with the interns, that we already saw many of them, it makes it more equitable and inclusive for students coming from different backgrounds. They make it adaptable to their lifestyle, and it helps solving the problem of internship costs, as interns, especially the ones that cannot, like we were talking before in the presentation of Paul, that maybe they can have problem with paying for their travel expenses, instead can easily offset these expenses with the reimbursement that company can provide. That is to say that in the world of internship abroad, international internship especially, and especially in the Asia region, many companies cannot afford to provide reimbursement, or they provide reimbursement that are not satisfactory for a full 6 months or 5 months in-person internship. These can actually greatly change when instead the in-person time is reduced, like in the case of hybrid internship. And also is for other group of interns, especially the ones that are a bit, let's say, more introvert and have more problem in getting to a new country and right away cultural shock, jumping a new company, facing a new culture. This makes it less intimidating to be introduced to the workforce of the company and to participate in the life of that company. For companies instead, like the benefits is that it eases the transition of new interns, or in this case can even be new employees if they aim to hire them into the workforce. Like we see these especially in Asia, where countries that are where in companies the main language spoken is the local language instead of English. Sometimes it can be a sort of cultural shock for an office to get new interns. Of course, nothing that is going to kill anybody, but it's something that can create some, let's say, headache to a supervisor that as other than to deal with his own work, is also to deal with his staff being used to a new person in the office. And while that helps a lot with the soft skills of the whole office, it can be nice to have a transition of this person first online and then easing it into the reality of the office offline. Also, as we see before with the reimbursement for the students, this can be cost effective for companies, as they, if they are willing to provide reimbursement, it will be easier for them to provide a satisfactory reimbursement to the student that can support the student during his time abroad. And it gives them the chance to dip into a more diverse pool of talents for recruitment, as more people will be actually able to participate and partake in internship with their companies. And finally, for our final stakeholder in this situation, that are the university, it allows them to have a more flexibility with their academic calendar. Like, actually, funny enough, we work with Swinburne as well, and a big problem we have with Swinburne students is that, like, they love their internship abroad, as you actually saw with but they have but the problem is that they would like to maybe intern for longer, but due to their academic calendar, this is not possible. Well, with the hybrid internship, this actually becomes more feasible, definitely, because, for example, students can intern for a longer period with just a part of it being in person, while the rest are being remote, so they can do it while doing something else, and they can do it part-time, for example. But at the same time gain more experience during their academic year without having to instead take internship in different times or trying to find other ways. They can also it make it more affordable for university, since the cost for of the in-person part will be reduced. Make it more affordable for university, which in turn will be able to provide fundings for more students, allowing more students to actually go abroad and doing internship in this way. Like now, of course, it's this model is far from perfect. There are still problems that needs to be solved. A problem can be the fact that relocating from a remote to an in-person internship training can make it difficult for the student to retain focus on the work, and while they are adjusting to a new country, dealing with the new culture, the new place where they're living, in general, the new environment around them. Also, instead, when we change from an in-person to a remote internship, these could present some new difficulties, such as the time zone difference and changing working environment. Think, for example, a student go back to his house, and like there is maybe the little brother going around while he's working, or the dog coming and barking behind him while he was used before to work in a office. Also, we have, of course, a language barrier problem that can reduce the impact of this experience. And it might be, of course, difficult to introduce this new model to companies and third parties right away, as it's a new model, and as we know, it takes time. We still have companies that are not actually so fond even of remote internship, so I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, it's not surprised that this can be a situation with hybrid as well. So my recommendation for this is that we should prepare the interns for the transition and provide them with their introduction to the new work environment between the two phases, making sure that they are not left on their own during this transition, and making sure that they are followed at every step without leaving them or making them feel that they are left alone, and make them feel to create a unified workflow with having in mind already that this workflow needs to include the collaborative and scheduling tools, so to make sure that the students don't waste time in doing menial work, that instead that can be easily solved with tools, and making them instead focus on the core part of their internship. And promoting the inclusion of the students by acknowledging their role since when they just started the internship, to make sure whatever is the first phase, a remote or in-person internship, to make sure they feel part of the company and they know that they are actually, part of it, and that they are contributing to its life. And finally, to add some cultural and language courses to the students to try to offset the problem deriving from language barrier and cultural shock. We actually found these very, very, very good with our Swinburne students specifically for our South Korean program, in which we actually provide them with some cultural orientation courses, and this has helped them greatly, actually, even in the remote, even if they are doing their internship remotely, to actually interact with their colleagues. And finally, some closing remarks on what we believe will be the future of this model. Like the hybrid internship model is a new concept. We're still testing it, still need some experience on it, some adjustment. As Paul was saying, we saw how our remote programs already evolved during the last 2 years. And I believe that hybrid internship will go through the same process, of evolving and getting better and better and better. Especially interns, companies, and university in general, all the stakeholders will need time to adapt this new model. So it will probably not be a thing that will happen within a week, but in the near future, I believe it will be a model that will be presented. We will work next to remote and in-person internship to promote inclusivity and equity in internships. And it's definitely will help in making work more hybrid, indeed flexible and accessible to people from different parts of the world and from different backgrounds, and has the potential to become a useful tool for students to equip them with the experience that is necessary for the competitive working environment in which we live today, and also this dynamic working environment. And I believe that hybrid, because of his nature of being so dynamic, will be a great help for the students. This is the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoy, and now I guess we can go to the Q&A. Matt, I think I leave the word to you now.
Yeah, Bruno just asked a question. I believe it pertains to your presentation, Daniel. So his question is, what training opportunities does the in-person phase provide to prepare students for remote learning?
That's a good question. So when I was talking in the recommendation about the creating a unified workflow, that actually is mostly to offset the problem of going both from in-person to remote and remote to in-person. So if the workflow that is created between the two phases is unified, this would remove many problems of, for example, having to transition in this case from in-person to remote, because during the in-person part, they will have the chance to already work with the same tools and with the same workflow that they will use when they work remotely. The only thing that should change is just the setting. By doing this, there won't be, let's say, the work shock of this situation of passing from a phase to the other. I believe these answer the question in case I
Yeah. Well, Bruno, if you would like further clarification, just let me know in the chat and we can ask that. I would ask that Paul and Noy and John come back on the screen. I have a question that I'll just throw out to all of you. So it seems in both presentations that students want to get back into more of an in-person. It could be a hybrid type of scenario. The challenge, as I see it right now, is a lot of the workforces still are remote, or they themselves have a bit of a hybrid formula. I've seen some backlash at certain companies where they're actually losing employees because they're like, well, we want you to come back in 4 or 5 days a week. And the employers have gotten used to this kind of working remotely, working from home, working from, a lovely sandy beach island or something like that. And that's worked for them. So I guess I'll just throw it out to anyone that would like to tackle it. Maybe John, I'll throw it to you. How do you see this kind of working out? If a student wants to do an internship with Bespoke Brewing, but their supervisor may be working remote or maybe in the office only 2 or 3 days a week, how do you foresee that kind of working for both the employer and the student in that instance?
I think it really comes down to, again, the matching of what needs to be done compared to the student's capabilities. when we go into and we're looking at a student, we want to make sure that they're able to basically check all the boxes, because then we know they're going to be so much more engaged. They're going to be able to complete the task with probably not as much training as let's say a person that might be in person might need or take advantage of because they're there every day. But we welcome it, mainly because of the environment we're in and the way that we are kind of global with our many different time zones.
Fantastic. Noy, did you, I think you did remote opportunities. If you were to go to China, for example, would that cause a challenge for you if you expected to go into an office 5 days a week and potentially your supervisor is only there a couple days, or is that something that you're flexible with?
You said that people are more wanting to do in person. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think a lot of people are still would love to do remote work. And if I was to go into the office every day and my supervisor was only there 1 or 2 days a week, as long as I had work to do, I don't think it would be that much of an issue. But I think having remote work from somewhere that you're comfortable, it gives you the flexibility to work on your own schedule as well. You don't have to work to a set time, have morning tea, lunch at a certain time. I think you kind of, you're more free to do work at your speed. As long as you get the work done, then you're still succeeding.
Fantastic. And Paul, what are you seeing from your communications with employers that you're reaching out to?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, for me, the biggest thing from the post-COVID era is what we're seeing in Europe now, whereas a lot of companies that aren't going into the office 5 days a week, or a lot of companies are really backing working remotely, where we're trying to do like an in-person hybrid, I guess you could call it. So where students will still travel to the host location supported by us as the provider, but potentially instances where we rent out co-working space within that international host location. So students could be working for different companies, but collectively, which gives new challenges, but also new opportunities for our staff to give hands-on support. And then for them to visit the supervisors as per their existing schedule. Now, this is very new, and of course, not all of our partners want this. You know, it's very important, I think, especially with STEM, you know, like engineering, you know, noise experience, that you do get that sort of hands-on, whether that's like working in a factory or as part of that team. But there are some that can be a little bit more flexible. So if the company is saying, well, we want somebody to come here, like we're not going to host them, it's not black and white, it's not going to be 30 hours, 35 hours in the office every week. It might be 3 days, and for those other 2 days, they might be working from an organized, structured co-working space with support from ourselves as, you know, experts in employability, which is good, but it's different, and it's something that we haven't really had time to digest yet. But for me, that was quite poignant in terms of quite a big change that's come out of the back of this.
Excellent. And how about you, Daniel? What are you hearing from your employers and also the students themselves?
I would say that here largely depends on a case-to-case basis and a bit on a country-to-country basis. Like I make a very simple example. Our two main destinations, okay, Thailand and Korea. While in Korea, we're seeing actually these the work from home and this kind of hybrid work situation actually being still implemented, and actually I see employer being happy with that. Actually, they have been even happy to get our, let's say, the proposal for our new programs, the hybrid internship and everything. Instead, we saw in Thailand people being way more reticent about it. So I believe that it might be due to also some cultural reason and ways in which the country works. Like, for example, in Thailand, there are a lot of public holidays. So these make it a bit inconvenient for business owner to also have the employees working from home, let's say a couple of days a week, because this can make it very hard, especially for startup made of young people, to actually keep track of the work of their employee. Also, when you started to put together public holidays with remote working in office settings, and you just go to the office a couple of days a week, it might be complicated for offices that they don't have a very good process in place to deal with these, to actually make sure that their, let's say, their work is done properly. So I would say it really depends on a case-to-case basis. Like, for example, for us, we are working on 3 days in the office, 2 days at home schedule. And for us, actually works very good. I actually see also a lot of benefits in it, because I believe that my employees also are more motivated to work in these kind of settings, and it makes it more bearable to also be part of your, participate in other things like friends, families, or important things that happens in your life, and that helps you keep a work and life balance. But I also understand where actually some of the companies we work with, they're coming from, as it can be very disruptive, especially for smaller realities. Like if it's a big company, it will have, of course, a lot of process in place, and these will make it fairly easy for them to make sure that there is not a huge transition shock between the two forms of work. But for a smaller company, this can be a bit tricky and would add the problems that are not easy to solve, or that they don't have the knowledge or the manpower to solve and stuff. Actually, this is what we do very often when we did very often with our company, our host of remote internship at the beginning, like literally teaching them, let's say, what to use and how to work with remote internships, because they were not used to do it, and they were not used to do it even with their own stuff. So that was the situation. But yeah, so I honestly, as I was saying even before when we were talking before this meeting, I believe we will get a proper answer and proper data about remote work, internship, and whatnot within the next 2 years, when the situation normalizes, and we will see effectively if this is if it's possible to maintain, is sustainable to maintain this kind of schedule and work moving forward. To be honest, this is my best, the best answer I can give to this.
Fantastic. Bruno has a follow-on question, or not a follow-on question, but another question about do you have remote students who feel isolated? And so that's a really important facet of what we all do, and for the the mental health well-being of our students. And for employees at organizations who are working remotely. I'm wondering if someone can talk to that a little bit. John, have you found that with any of your students? Do you have any strategies? You mentioned earlier that you check in with them at least on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. Is that part of a conversation that you would have during your check-in?
For sure. I think it's just connection at a human level, really. Just seeing how they're doing. We asked a lot of, whether it's not PC or not, personal questions, how you doing, what's going on in life, engaging, just show that you care about them as a person and a friend, colleague, all the above. I think that really helped out, and it just helps with the connection.
Right. And knowing, not to put you on the spot, but with your fellow classmates, is that something that you have heard anecdotally that is a challenge for some students that are working remotely, or sorry, doing an internship remotely or learning remotely even?
I have heard it from one person, but I think that depends on the internship provider.
Right.
So like John said, we had a WhatsApp group basically, and we would communicate. And even on days where it was a public holiday, I didn't even realize, they would still respond. It wasn't like, oh no, I'm not working, I'm not going to respond. It was always that connection. So it does make you feel like you're valued, and you don't feel isolated in that way.
Excellent. Paul, can you add to that? I'm sure it's something that you've spent a lot of time thinking about, putting strategies in place certainly over the last couple of years. I know it was a big concern even pre-pandemic. What can you tell us about what Pagoda does?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, students will be feeling isolated, and I think all that we can do as providers is put in that structure. And so, like I mentioned in the presentation, every week we ask students to check in. And then if we see that a student hasn't checked in on time, for example, then we can prioritize them for our staff to proactively reach out and then try to elicit from them, is it that they don't understand the program? Is it that they're not understanding what they're supposed to be doing? But at the end of the day, with remote, we're very much dependent on the students' willingness to engage with us and to use those mechanisms that we put in place. If they don't do that, it's quite difficult for us, and we've definitely had those instances where people haven't used the tools we put in place. But in the vast majority of cases, I think it works pretty well, and provided the student's willing to sort of do that base level of engagement, then we can support them. But it definitely does happen.
And Daniel, can you tell us a little bit what AIP does?
Well, for us, even to respond directly to the question of Bruno, I guess, sorry. To be honest, actually, we had this. Unfortunately, it happened. It happened at the beginning of when we started our remote programs. To be honest, we were experimenting as well, and we didn't have yet the process in place that we have right now. And while we were doing temperature check with our interns and we were making sure that the internship was going good and everything, but we were honestly lacking on the human level at the beginning. I have to say that our temperature check were unfortunately just internship oriented. So I was going the internship, is everything fine with the company? And let's say we were not delving too much in their personal situation during the internship. We were not honestly, because usually we implement community events and we have our community manager that actually works with our on-ground students. So this, I'm talking of the very first batch of remote interns we're having. We didn't realize that since we didn't have anymore that human interaction where we were going out, bringing them out, bringing them to events, to trip and whatnot, there was the need to replace that not only with the call to make sure that the internship is good, but also for a call to just say, how are you? Are you fine? How is your life going? How is the quarantine in your country? You know, those conversation that I guess we all had even between some of us, like I definitely had one with Paul, that though we realized that we were not having with our first batch of remote students. And to be honest, lesson learned after that, like they, of course, they told us, and the only thing that we could say is like, you're right, and we started to implement these things. So right now, actually, for each country or every 2 countries, we have a community manager that actually take care of keeping connection with the students, away from just the internship, how it's going, and things related specifically to the internship, but just to have a bit of a conversation, kind of even build some building some relation with the student during the internship, so that they feel like there is someone that cares and that they are not just paying for something and going to something of which no one cares about that. And yep, that's what happened to it.
Fantastic. Well, believe it or not, we're at time. This hour flew past, and thank you so much for everyone's participation, particularly Noy and John. We greatly enjoyed your perspectives. Thank you, Paul and Daniel, for putting so much thought into your presentations as well. And thank you to the audience for tuning in. I don't know what time it is in your part of the world. It's now 3:03 in the morning for me, so I might go back to bed shortly. But I'm so glad that we were able to gather. As I mentioned, this session has been recorded. I will send it out to everyone. And please feel free to share it with any colleagues that were unable to either attend the conference or this session in particular. And I think there's so much to be learned from this. And I also feel that there's a lot of ground to go over too, in particularly to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yesterday, we had a session on the Canadian model and how the government is trying to promote international experiences. and sending students abroad, particularly from more diverse populations. And I know that Australia and in New Zealand and various other countries in Asia have similar programs in place. And I think that's something that we should maybe look into for a future session. But anyway, so that's for another day. But thank you so much again. And I appreciate everyone's time, and have a wonderful rest of the day for everyone involved. So we'll sign off
Thank you,
from
Matt.
here.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everyone.
Matt, and
Thank you for
everybody.
having me.
All right,
Thanks,
fantastic.
guys. All the best. Take care.
All right, bye-bye, everyone.